Sunday afternoon found Diane in her kitchen, meticulously arranging strawberry slices on a tart. Harold watched from the doorway, amazed at the transformation of his wife who, just 10 days earlier, had been threatening legal action against their neighbors. "You're putting a lot of effort into this," he observed. Diane adjusted a strawberry by 2 millimeters. "If I'm going to do this, I'll do it properly. Winters never shows up with subpar offerings." Harold wisely kept his smile hidden. This was classic Diane, channeling her perfectionism into a new outlet. At the Goldsteins' house, the backyard hummed with conversation and laughter. Children, including Emma Hoffman, played a chaotic game of tag while adults clustered around food tables and lawn chairs. Diane clutched her tart like a shield. "You came," Rachel exclaimed, genuinely pleased, "and you brought your famous strawberry tart." "Joel, the Winters are here." Before Diane could correct her, it wasn't famous anymore, just forgotten. She found herself swept into the gathering, her tart whisked away to the dessert table, a glass of sangria pressed into her hand. Eleanor Chen approached, now HOA president but dressed in casual jeans rather than the power suits Diane had always considered mandatory for the role. "I'm glad you're here," Eleanor said. "I wanted to ask about the rose varieties in your front garden. They're spectacular, and I've been thinking of adding some to the community center planters." Instead of the expected interrogation about her unauthorized security cameras, Eleanor wanted gardening advice. Diane found herself discussing soil fit and pruning techniques, surrounded by an attentive group of neighbors she previously only communicated with via violation notices. Across the yard, she spotted Linda and Mark Hoffman. Linda caught her eye and, after a moment's hesitation, walked over. "Try the guacamole," she suggested, nodding toward the food table. "Raj makes it fresh. It's incredible." The awkward silence that followed was broken by Harold, who'd been chatting with Mark about woodworking projects. "Linda was just saying you're moving next month," he said. "Where are you headed?" "Denver," Linda replied. "Mark's firm is opening a new office. We'll miss this place, though. It's starting to feel like a real community." The words stung Diane more than expected. Had Maple Creek not been a real community before? But looking around at neighbors freely interacting, children playing across property lines without fear of citations, she recognized an atmosphere that had been missing during her rigid leadership. "Your treehouse project turned out well," Diane offered, the closest thing to an olive branch she could manage. Linda's surprise was evident. "Thank you. Emma loves it. Actually, she's been taking some amazing bird photos from up there. She's got quite an eye." As if summoned, Emma bounded over. "Mom, Mrs. Goldstein says I can put my bird photos in the community newsletter. She says they're really good." "That's wonderful, honey," Linda beamed, then hesitated. "Mrs. Winters was just saying she likes your treehouse." Emma regarded Diane warily. "Really? I thought you didn't like anything that wasn't in the rules." "Emma," Linda admonished, but Diane waved her off. "It's a fair assessment," she admitted. "I've been particular about the rules. Perhaps too particular sometimes." Emma studied her for a moment. "Would you like to see my photos? I got one of the cardinal family nesting. They're super rare around here." Before she could formulate a response, Diane found herself being led toward the Hoffman home, Emma chattering enthusiastically about migration patterns and nesting habits. The treehouse, which Diane had imagined as a garish monstrosity, was actually a tasteful structure that blended with the tree's natural shape. Inside, Emma had created a small photography studio with printed images pinned to the walls, birds in flight perched on branches feeding their young. "These are remarkable," Diane said, genuinely impressed by the 12-year-old's talent. "Thanks. I want to be a wildlife photographer someday. Dad says I need to practice getting different perspectives." Looking at Maple Creek Estates through Emma's lens, focusing on the natural beauty rather than rule violations, Diane realized she'd been missing perspectives too. For years, she'd seen only what was wrong, never what was right. When they returned to the party, Diane found Harold deep in conversation with neighbors about a community project to build benches for the park. He looked happier than she'd seen him in years. Diane Winter's morning routine was precise and unyielding. Wake at 5:30 a.m., check neighborhood security cameras, note violations, and plan enforcement strategies before most residents had their first cup of coffee. The HOA presidency wasn't just a position to her. It was a calling. This morning, however, Diane sat at her kitchen island scrolling through angry emails from neighbors. Word of yesterday's confrontation with Linda had spread through Maple Creek Estates like wildfire. Worse, someone had posted Emma's video online, where it already had thousands of views and comments calling Diane the HOA Karen from hell. "They don't understand," she muttered to her husband, Harold, who silently sipped his coffee while avoiding eye contact. Property values dropped 12% in Cedar Brook when they let standards slip. 12%, Harold. Harold nodded automatically. After 26 years of marriage, he perfected the art of agreeing without listening. Diane's phone pinged with a notification. The HOA's private Facebook group was active. Residents were calling for an emergency meeting tonight. Unacceptable. Meetings were scheduled 3 months in advance with agendas submitted in triplicate. I'll just deny the request, she said, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Section 4, paragraph 7 clearly requires. Diane Harold interrupted, a rare occurrence that made her look up in surprise. Maybe it's time to listen to what people want. She stared at him as if he'd suggested they paint their pristine White House neon pink. What people want is chaos, Harold. Remember the Williams' attempt to install artificial turf? Or the Goldstein's proposal for a communal vegetable garden? Anarchy. Harold sighed and retreated behind his newspaper. Diane dressed carefully in her power suit, the navy one she wore to important confrontations, and headed to the community center. She'd simply explain the rules again, remind everyone that property values depended on uniformity and compliance. She was surprised to find the parking lot already full at 9 a.m. Inside, at least 30 residents sat in folding chairs, falling silent as she entered. Mark Hoffman, Linda's husband, stood at the front with a projector setup. "What is this?" Diane demanded. "I didn't authorize this gathering." "Actually," Diane said, Eleanor Chen, the quiet accountant from Willow Lane, "according to the original bylaws you quoted so often, any group of 15 or more homeowners can call an emergency session without board approval." Mark nodded. "We've been reviewing the actual legal documents, not the creative interpretation the current board has been using." "But I am the board," Diane said, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, I represent the board." "That's part of the problem," said Raj Patel. "The bylaws require 5 board members elected annually. You've been operating alone for 3 years." Mark clicked to a slide showing state law regarding HOA governance. "We've also discovered that the increase in HOA fees last year was never properly voted on, and the special assessment for the front entrance renovation exceeded legal limits." Diane felt her carefully constructed world crumbling. Those improvements were necessary. The old sign was an embarrassment. "The marble fountain with your name engraved on it was necessary?" asked Linda, who sat in the back row. "I've served this community tirelessly." Diane's voice rose. "The architectural harmony, the consistent landscaping, the absence of those tacky, inflatable holiday decorations, all because of my dedication." Eleanor stood up. "We've prepared a motion to reorganize the board according to the original bylaws. We'll vote today." As hands raised around the room, Diane realized with growing horror that her reign was ending. But she wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days after the emergency meeting, Diane sat in her sunroom surrounded by binders of HOA documentation. The vote had been unanimous. All 32 residents present had supported the motion to reorganize the board. They'd elected 5 members on the spot. Eleanor Chan as president, Raj Patel as vice president, and 3 others Diane considered troublemakers. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Patricia, the only neighbor who hadn't betrayed her. Emergency. "The Hoffman girl is putting up a tree HOUC." Diane bolted upright. Perfect. This was exactly the opportunity she needed to demonstrate why strong leadership was essential. Without her vigilance, Maple Creek Estates would descend into suburban anarchy. She grabbed her camera and marched across the neighborhood, rehearsing bylaws in her head. The Hoffman property came into view, and indeed Mark and Linda were in their backyard with Emma, assembling wooden panels around an oak tree. "I hope you have a permit for that structure," Diane called out, raising her camera to document the violation. Linda sighed, but Mark smiled. "Good morning, Diane. Yes, we do have approval." "Impossible. The architectural committee hasn't met since." "Since you dissolved it and appointed yourself sole reviewer?" Mark finished. "The new board reinstated it yesterday. They reviewed and approved our application this morning." Diane's mouth tightened. That committee can't possibly have evaluated the sightlines, elevation concerns, and aesthetic cohesion in less than 24 hours. Actually, Emma piped up, Eleanor and Mr. Patel came by before breakfast. They said as long as it's not visible from the street and follows safety codes, it's fine. But the materials. Diane gestured at the wooden panels. Section 11 requires all external structures to match the primary residence's color palette. Mark passed her a folder. "You'll find our paint samples match our trim exactly. We've also included the arborist's assessment confirming the tree can support the structure and the contractor's certification for the design." Diane flipped through the meticulously prepared documents, searching desperately for a violation. "This doesn't address potential noise concerns." Linda crossed her arms. "The nearest neighbor is 60 feet away, Diane. And unlike someone's 2 a.m. security patrol with floodlights, a child playing quietly in a tree doesn't disturb anyone." Diane felt her control slipping. "The board may have changed, but the covenants remain. I'll be watching for any deviations." As she turned to leave, she spotted Raj Patel across the street installing solar panels on his roof, panels she projected 4 times. Next door, the Goldsteins were marking out what appeared to be a garden plot. Down the block, the Williams were unloading rolls of artificial turf. The neighborhood was changing before her eyes. Back home, Diane found an official envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a notice from the new board requesting she remove her own unauthorized modifications, specifically the surveillance cameras aimed at neighbors' properties, the expanded driveway that encroached on the common area, and the fence she'd installed 2 inches beyond her property line. The letter was signed by Eleanor Chen, with a personal note, "Diane, we value your attention to detail. Perhaps you consider joining the landscaping committee? Your garden is truly exemplary." Diane crumpled the paper, then smoothed it out again. The landscaping committee? A demotion from absolute power to gardening advice. Harold appeared at her side. "Everything all right?" "They want me to join the landscaping committee," she said, voice hollow. To her surprise, Harold smiled. "You know, roses have won county awards 3 years running. Might be nice to focus on something you love instead of fighting with everyone." Diane glanced at her garden where her prized roses bloomed in perfect rows. She'd been so busy enforcing rules lately, she barely had time to enjoy them. "I suppose I could attend one meeting," she conceded reluctantly. "Someone needs to ensure they don't plant invasive species." The landscaping committee meeting was held in the Goldsteins' backyard, which Diane considered an immediate breach of protocol. Proper meetings took place in the sterile community center with fluorescent lighting and metal folding chairs, not uncomfortable patio furniture surrounded by flowering plants with refreshments served. "We thought it would be nice to be closer to the subject matter," Rachel Goldstein explained, offering Diane homemade lemonade. 5 other neighbors sat in a loose circle, including Linda Hoffman, who gave Diane a cautious nod. The conversation flowed with disturbing informality. No agenda, no minutes being recorded, just enthusiastic discussion about native plants and pollinator gardens. "We were thinking of converting the front entrance from those water-hungry annuals to xeriscape design," explained Joel Kim, showing concept sketches. "It would cut our water bill by 30% and reduce maintenance costs." "Absolutely not," Diane interjected. "The entrance sets the tone for the entire community. Those petunias and marigolds are our signature look." Instead of the immediate capitulation she expected, the group simply nodded thoughtfully. "That's a fair point about first impressions," Linda acknowledged. "What if we kept seasonal color at the entrance but used drop-resistant plants for the side beds? And we could install a drip irrigation system," added Rachel. "We'd still save on water while keeping the welcome area vibrant." Diane opened her mouth to object, then paused. The compromise was reasonable, and the projected savings would help keep HOA fees from increasing, something she's struggled with for years. "I suppose a phased approach might work," she conceded, provided the color palette remains consistent. By the end of the meeting, Diane had reluctantly agreed to 3 proposals and even volunteered to research butterfly-friendly perennials for the playground border. As everyone departed, Rachel touched her arm. "We're having a neighborhood potluck Sunday. Nothing formal, just getting to know each other better. Would you and Harold like to come?" Diane's immediate instinct was to cite the rule against unauthorized gatherings on common property. "It's our house," Rachel added, anticipating the objection. "Totally within regulations." "I'll check our schedule," Diane replied, caught off guard by the invitation. Walking home, she noticed details she'd overlooked during her rule enforcement patrols. The Chen family's elaborate birdhouses that attracted songbirds, the whimsical garden gnomes hiding in the Williams' new water-wise landscaping, the children playing basketball in the Paddles' driveway. The neighborhood seemed more alive somehow. At home, she found Harold fixing the garden gate. "How was the meeting?" he asked. "Chaotic," she replied automatically, then reconsidered. "But productive. They actually had some good ideas." Harold looked up in surprise. "That's new. They invited us to a potluck Sunday." "Let's go," he said immediately. "I haven't had a real conversation with the neighbors in years. What would I even bring?" Diane wondered aloud. "And what would we talk about besides property values and compliance issues?" Harold smiled gently. "Remember when we first moved here? Before you became president, you used to make that amazing strawberry tart everyone loved." Diane did remember. She'd been proud of that tart, of the compliments it earned. Somehow, between inspection reports and violation notices, she'd stopped baking altogether. The next morning, Diane spotted Linda in her front yard tending to newly planted flowers. "Those aren't on the approved plant list," Diane said automatically, then winced at her own words. To her surprise, Linda smiled. "They're native wildflowers. The new landscape guidelines just approved them yesterday. Want some for your garden? They're great for bees." Diane stared at the vibrant blooms. "I don't do wildflowers. They're too unpredictable." "Sometimes unpredictable things turn out beautifully," Linda replied, gesturing toward Emma's treehouse now adorned with wind chimes and bird feeders. "The finches found it before we even finished building." As if on cue, a flash of yellow darted into the oak tree, followed by cheerful chirping. For the first time in years, Diane noticed the silence of her own perfectly manicured yard. No birds, no children laughing, no wind chimes, just meticulous order and quiet. The monthly HOA meeting looked nothing like the summer proceedings Diane had orchestrated for years. The community center buzzed with conversation as neighbors settled into chairs arranged in a circle rather than the formal rows Diane had insisted upon. Children played quietly in a corner equipped with art supplies and books, another departure from her no-children policy. Diane sat beside Harold, feeling oddly vulnerable without her usual presence, podium, and gavel. 2 weeks had passed since the potluck, during which she reluctantly removed her unauthorized security cameras and trimmed her fence line to comply with property boundaries. Eleanor called the meeting to order with a simple, "Shall we get started?" A far cry from Diane's formal parliamentary procedure announcements. "First, I want to thank everyone for the successful community garden kickoff last weekend," Eleanor began. "Special thanks to Diane for her expertise on companion planting. The layout looks fantastic." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Diane felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected recognition. She offered a few suggestions, nothing more, yet somehow her name had been the one mentioned. The meeting progressed through agenda items with surprising efficiency. Without the rigid adherence to formalities Diane had enforced, issues were discussed openly, decisions made collaboratively. When disagreements arose, they were addressed with respect rather than citations of bylaws. Next item, Eleanor continued, "Hoffman's moving sale next Saturday. Linda, would you like to share the details?" Linda stood, smiling at the group. "As most of you know, we're relocating to Denver. We'd like to hold a yard sale for items we're not taking with us. The new board has approved it, but we wanted to invite everyone to participate if you have things to sell. We thought it could be a neighborhood event." In the past, Diane would have immediately objected. Personal sales were restricted to the annual community garage sale, held the third weekend in April, a rule she had personally drafted. But as neighbors enthusiastically discussed combining resources for advertising and refreshments, she remained silent. "Diane," Eleanor said suddenly, "you mentioned having experience organizing the annual sales. Any advice for us?" All eyes turned her way. Diane hesitated, then found herself offering practical suggestions about timing, signage, and traffic management. To her surprise, people listened attentively, nodding and taking notes. After the meeting, Linda approached her. "Those were great ideas about the directional signs. I wouldn't have thought about color coding by street." "Organization is important," Diane replied, then added awkwardly, "Your pool, the one I called the police about, are you taking it to Denver?" Linda shook her head. "It won't fit our new yard. We're selling it at the moving sale." "I might be interested," Diane said, surprising herself as much as Linda. "Our backyard gets unbearably hot in summer. Harold mentioned wanting one last year, but I cited restriction 14C prohibiting visible recreational equipment." Linda finished with a slight smile. Diane nodded, embarrassed. "The new board has different interpretations of the guidelines." "More reasonable ones," Linda agreed. "Come by on Friday before the sale if you want first look at the pool." That evening, Diane sat on her pristine patio, imagining the space occupied by the very pool she tried to have removed by law enforcement. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone chimed with a notification from the neighborhood's social media group, a platform she previously used only for posting reminders about violations. Emma Hoffman had shared her bird photographs, including one of a cardinal perched on Diane's own rose trellis, captioned, "Beauty found in unexpected places." Harold settled into the chair beside her. "I spoke with Mark after the meeting. He said if we're serious about the pool, he'd help us set it up before they leave." "What would the neighbors think?" Diane murmured. "Me with a backyard pool after all my fuss." Harold reached for her hand. "Maybe they think you've learned something. I know I have, watching you these past weeks." Diane squeezed his hand, contemplating how quickly life could change. A month ago, she'd been at war with her community. Now she was planning to purchase a pool from the very people she called the police on for removing it. "We'd need to register it with the architectural committee," she said, old habits surfacing. Harold laughed. Already thinking about the rules, some things never change. But they had changed. Diane smiled, already mentally planning where the pool would go and who she might invite for the first backyard gathering. Perhaps her famous strawberry tart would make another appearance. Friday evening found Diane standing awkwardly on the Hoffmans' front porch, clutching her checkbook. The moving truck in the driveway was half filled with labeled boxes, a visual reminder that this family would soon be gone, partially because of the hostile environment she had created. Mark answered her knock, looking surprised despite their arrangement. "Diane, come in. Linda's finishing up in the kitchen, but I can show you the pool components." She followed him through the house, now echoing with emptiness as their belongings had been packed away. In the garage, the disassembled pool was neatly organized. the same pool that had sparked the confrontation that changed everything. It's 3 years old, but in excellent condition, Mark explained, lifting the filter system. We've kept all the maintenance records and instruction manuals. Diane nodded, mentally calculating where each piece would fit in her yard. Harold measured our space. It should work perfectly. Linda appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The tension between them had faded but not vanished entirely. We can help set it up this weekend if you'd like, she offered. Before we leave on Tuesday. That's very generous considering our history, Diane replied, the closest she could come to acknowledging her past behavior. Linda exchanged a glance with Mark. Actually, there's something we wanted to discuss with you. Emma's bird photography, you seem genuinely impressed. I was. She has remarkable talent. The thing is, Mark continued, she's been accepted into a weekend nature photography program at the community college. But with us moving, she can't participate. Diane frowned, unsure where this was heading. She needs a local sponsor, Linda explained. Someone to drive her to the campus Saturday mornings and pick her up in the afternoons. We thought with your interest in her work and her gardening knowledge. You want me to sponsor Emma? Diane was dumbfounded. We've asked others, but most families have sports commitments on weekends, Mark said. We understand if it's too much. The request was so unexpected, so contrary to the adversarial relationship they'd had, that Diane found herself speechless. They were entrusting their daughter to her, the woman who had called police on their family. I need to see the schedule, she said finally, and confirm the program's credentials. Linda smiled, clearly having anticipated this response. Of course. We have all the paperwork inside. Over coffee at their half-packed kitchen table, Diane reviewed the program details with the same thoroughness she'd once applied to covenant violations. The photography instructor was nationally recognized, the safety protocols were comprehensive, and the schedule was manageable. Emma would be thrilled, Linda said. She was disappointed about missing the program. Why me? Diane asked bluntly, after everything that happened. Mark and Linda exchanged another look. You're changing, Linda said simply. We've all seen it, and despite our differences, you notice details others miss. Emma's photography is about seeing what others don't see. You understand that. Diane thought about the cardinal photograph, the one taken from her own garden without her knowledge. The bird had chosen her roses as its perch, finding beauty in a space she had maintained with rigid precision rather than joy. I'll do it, she decided, provided Emma is comfortable with the arrangement. As if on cue, the front door opened and Emma bounded in, cheeks flushed from playing with neighborhood friends. Mrs. Winters, she exclaimed, surprised, are you here about the pool? Partly, Linda replied, but she also has some news about your photography program. Emma's eyes widened as her parents explained the arrangement. Instead of the dismay Diane expected, the girl's face lit up. Really? You can do that for me? Emma asked, bouncing with excitement. I can show you all the best birdwatching spots. There's a blue heron that visits the pond behind the community center at sunrise. Nobody else has managed to photograph it. The child's enthusiasm was infectious. Diane found herself agreeing to early morning birdwatching expeditions and photography field trips beyond the Saturday classes. As they finalized details for both the pool purchase and Emma's program, Diane realized she was no longer viewing the Hoffmans as adversaries but as neighbors, and perhaps something close to friends. Later, as Mark helped load the disassembled pool into Harold's pickup truck, Emma approached with a manila envelope. This is for you, she said shyly. Thank you, gift. Inside was a framed photograph of Diane's garden taken from the treehouse vantage point, a perspective she'd never seen before. Her meticulous rows of roses formed a heart shape that was invisible from ground level. 1 month later, Diane stood in her backyard surveying the transformation. The Hoffman pool, now the Winters pool, sparkled in the summer sun. Around it, potted plants, some traditional, some wildflowers suggested by the landscaping committee, created a vibrant perimeter. Comfortable chairs, a small table for refreshments, and colorful towels completed the scene. What do you think? Harold asked, his arm around her shoulders. Ready for our first pool party? Diane nodded, though her stomach fluttered with nervous energy. In 30 minutes, neighbors would arrive. Neighbors she had once fined, reported, and antagonized, and now invited to relax in her backyard. Her phone chimed with a video call from Denver. Linda Hoffman's smiling face appeared on screen. We just wanted to wish you luck today. Is everything ready? Diane angled the phone to show the pool area. Mark's instructions were perfect. Harold and Raj had it assembled in a weekend. And those must be Eleanor's suggested plantings along the fence. They look amazing. The easy conversations still felt surreal. Weekly video chats with Linda had become routine, usually focused on Emma's photography program, but evolving into genuine friendship. Emma wants to say hi, Linda said, passing the phone to her daughter. Mrs. Winters, I got an A on my first portfolio assignment. The instructor loved the heron photos we took last Saturday. "Congratulations," Diane replied warmly. "I've been practicing with those manual settings you showed me. The garden committee wants photographs for the new brochures." After ending the call, Diane made final preparations for the gathering. The strawberry tarts were cooling, the lemonade was chilled, and the pool temperature was perfect. Harold had strung white lights in the trees that would illuminate the yard as evening fell. The doorbell rang, the first guests arriving. Diane took a deep breath, smoothed her sundress, and went to welcome them. Eleanor and her husband arrived first, followed by the Pavels, the Goldsteins, and others. Soon the backyard hummed with conversation and laughter. Children splashed in the pool under adult supervision, teenagers lounged on pool floats, and neighbors mingled with an ease that would have been unimaginable 2 months ago. Raj Patel raised his glass. A toast to our hostess, who not only makes the best strawberry tart in the county, but has also agreed to chair the Fall Festival Committee. Cheers erupted, making Diane blush. The festival planning had been her idea, a community-wide celebration with food, games, and a showcase for local talents like Emma's photography. As the party continued around her, Diane found a quiet moment to sit beside Patricia, her one loyal friend from the old days. "I hardly recognize this place," Patricia commented, "or you, for that matter." "Is that a compliment or criticism?" Diane asked, smiling to soften the question. Patricia considered. "Neither. Just an observation. You seem lighter somehow, less burdened." Diane watched Harold teaching the Chen children how to float on their backs, his laughter carrying across the water. "I spent so many years trying to control everything, thinking I was maintaining standards, preserving property values, but I was really just building walls." "Well, the walls are certainly down now." Patricia gestured toward the Williams' children running through the yard playing tag with the Goldstein's dog, activities that would have triggered multiple violation notices in the past. As twilight approached, Harold flipped his switch, illuminating the trees with soft white lights. A collective ooh rose from the gathering. "This is what community feels like," Eleanor said, settling into a chair beside Diane. "Not just living in proximity, but creating something together." Diane thought of Emma's photograph, her precisely planted roses forming a heart visible only from above. Sometimes the most beautiful patterns emerge without conscious design. Her phone buzzed with a text from Linda. "Emma says check your email. She sent something special." Excusing herself, Diane retrieved her tablet and opened her inbox. Emma had sent a photo taken at dawn that morning, the blue heron at the community pond, wings outstretched in perfect symmetry against the rising sun. The caption read, "For my first photography mentor, some beautiful things only appear when we're willing to wake up early and look at the world differently." Diane felt her eyes well with tears. 1 month ago, she had been Maple Creek's dreaded Hoa Karen, enforcing rules with rigid precision, calling police over a backyard pool. Now she was a mentor, a committee chair, a neighbor hosting a pool party. She returned to the gathering where Harold was preparing to serve the strawberry tarts. As